Summary of Disgrace by J.M. Coetzee. David Lurie is a professor in Cape Town, South Africa, who is in his mid-40s. He used to teach classics and modern languages, but now he's an assistant professor of communications, which means he doesn't care about the subject he teaches. But he can still teach one class of his own choice, so he teaches a class on romantic poetry, which doesn't make him very happy. He does have other ways to have fun, like going to see a prostitute named Soraya every Thursday night. After being married twice, he enjoys Soraya's simple company, which only lasts one night at a time. After he accidentally runs into her and her two kids in public, which adds a strange element to their transactional relationship, their relationship soon changes. The next time he goes to see her, she tells him she's leaving the house to take care of her sick mother. When he calls her a few weeks later after finding her phone number, she yells at him for harassing her and demands that he never talk to her again. David is walking around campus at this time when he sees Melanie Isaacs, a beautiful 20-year-old student in his romantic poetry class. When he finally catches up to her, he invites her to his flat for wine and dinner. Melanie is stressed and jumpy the whole evening. David tries to make her feel at ease anyway, and even though it's clear she wants to leave, he asks her to stay the night. She asks him why she should do this, and he tells her that beautiful women have a duty to share their beauty with others. This doesn't convince her, though, and she leaves soon after. But a few days later, he takes her to lunch, then drives her back to his apartment and has sex with her on his living room floor. He notices that she just lays there and doesn't do anything, which doesn't bother him. As David's affair with Melanie goes on, Melanie pulls away from him even more, which hurts her participation in class. But because they are together, he marks her as present. He also keeps pursuing her, going to one of her theater practices and showing up at her flat one night without warning, throwing himself on her, putting her in his arms, and moving towards the bedroom even though she tells him to stop because her flatmate will be home soon. In the bedroom, he takes her clothes off, and she helps him slide her trousers off by lifting her hips. This doesn't mean, though, that she responds better than she did the first time they had sex. Not rape, not quite that, but still not wanted at all, writes Coetzee. She misses class again the next day and, as a result, the midterm test, but David still gives her a 70%. Melanie shows up at David's flat the next weekend and asks if she can stay. She seems to be upset about something, so he sets up a bed for her in the room his daughter used to sleep in and lets her sleep there. He goes into the bedroom the next morning and asks what's wrong. She tells him that she needs to stay with him for a while. Against his better judgment, he agrees. The next day, they have their last sexual encounter. Then, later that day, a young guy named Ryan comes to David's office and threatens him, telling him to stay away from Melanie. That night, someone breaks into David's car. Melanie stops going to David's flat after that. One day, she goes to class with Ryan, who sits next to her and looks at David with a challenge in his eyes as he talks. He tells Melanie after class that she needs to take the midterm the next Monday, but when Monday comes, he finds a note in his staff mailbox saying that Melanie has dropped out of his class. Things move quickly from here on out. Melanie's father calls David and tells him that Melanie has always respected him, so he wants David to persuade Melanie to stay in school. But Mr. Isaacs soon finds out what really happened, so Melanie makes a complaint about sexual harassment. The disciplinary committee gives David a chance to tell his side of the story at his meeting, but he just pleads guilty to whatever Melanie has said. Since he hasn't even looked at the accusations, though, the committee members find his behavior to be rude and confrontational. They eventually try to get him to apologize, but he refuses. Because of this, he has to quit his job at the university. David goes to the Eastern Cape to see his daughter Lucy, who lives on a farm, after giving up his job. Lucy has been farming with her partner Helen for a few years, but Helen just left. Now, Lucy is on her own, except for a guy named Petrus who works for her and lives on a piece of her land that he is about to buy. Lucy doesn't press David for information about his problems in Cape Town. Instead, she tells him he can stay as long as he wants and tells him to think of her home as refuge. He wants to write an opera about the artist Lord Byron, but he is having trouble getting started. He helps out with Lucy's dog kennel, which she runs on her land, to pass the time. Sometimes he works with Petrus. He also helps Lucy sell her things at a farmer's market and meets her friends Bev and Bill Shaw. He doesn't like either of them because he thinks they are too plain and not beautiful. But because he's bored, he chooses to volunteer at the Animal Welfare League, where Bev Shaw treats hurt animals and, more often than not, puts them to sleep. David and Lucy are out for a walk one night when they see three guys they don't know. When they get back to the farm, they find these scary strangers who say they need to use the phone because one of their sisters is giving birth. Lucy reluctantly lets two of them in, and David knows within minutes that something is wrong, but he can't do anything because the strangers have locked Lucy and themselves in the house. When he breaks in, they hit him over the head, drag him to the toilet and lock him in there. He can't break down the door no matter how hard he tries, so he calls Lucy's name and feels useless. Through the window, he sees the men take Lucy's rifle outside and shoot all of the dogs in the outdoor kennel, except for a small bulldog called Katie. After what seems like a long time, the door opens, and the men pour flammable liquid on him and set him on fire with a match. He feels and sees flames shoot up from his body all of a sudden, so he runs back into the bathroom and douses the fire with toilet water. The attackers then lock him back inside again. The three guys get into David's car with their arms full of different appliances and drive away. Lucy lets David out after the attack. She is in a bathrobe and has wet hair, but she won't talk about what happened, even though it's clear that the guys raped her. She tells him she's going to walk to her neighbor Ettinger's house and asks him to stick to his own story about what happened. She leaves and comes back with Ettinger in his truck. Ettinger then takes David to the hospital to get his burns fixed and drops him off there. When David comes out of the house hours later, he finds that Bill Shaw, not Lucy, has been waiting for him. He is surprised that Bill would wait for him even though they don't know each other very well. He is even more surprised when Bill says, "What else are friends for?" In the weeks to come, David is worried by the fact that Petrus wasn't there when the attack happened. David finds out that he was out of town at a good time. But when he comes back, David can't get him to tell him anything, which makes David suspicious. During this time, Petrus throws a party to celebrate the fact that he now owns a piece of Lucy's land. At this party, David and Lucy see Pollux, one of the three people who attacked them. As David moves towards him and says he'll call the cops, Petrus steps in between them and tells him not to do anything. Later, at home, Lucy also tells her father not to call the police. When he tries to talk to her again about what happened, she won't talk about it. David goes back to Cape Town because he and Lucy have been together for too long. On the way, he stops in Melanie's hometown and sees Mr. Isaacs at work. Isaacs is surprised to see David, but he is willing to talk to him and asks him to dinner that same night. Melanie's mother and sister are stressed the whole night, but Mr. Isaacs is nice to David. Isaacs tries to figure out why David has come, but his wife and daughter leave the room and go to another part of the house. He then tells David to make peace with God about what he's done. David is upset by this sudden moral attack, so he runs to the back of the house, where Melanie's mother and sister are sitting on a bed, and kneels in front of them with his head on the floor to show that he is sorry. Back in Cape Town, David finds that someone has broken into his flat. He tries to work on his opera project without stopping, but Bev gives him hints over the phone that something has happened, so he goes back to Lucy's house. Lucy tells him she is pregnant and that the baby will belong to one of the men who raped her when she was young. She has also chosen not to have an abortion because she has already had one and doesn't want to go through it again. David didn't know any of this. He thinks his daughter is making the wrong choice, but he knows he can't change her mind. Worse, Lucy tells him that Pollux has moved in with Petrus, even though she says he has some problems with his mind. Still, she doesn't want to leave. This makes David very angry, and a few days later, when he sees Pollux spying on Lucy through a window, he loses his cool. He knows right away that Pollux is looking at her dress, so he lets Katie beat up the young man while he kicks and screams at him, calling him a swine and saying he's not good enough. Lucy runs out to help Pollux when she hears the noise, but as she does so, her top slides down and shows her breasts. When she turns away to fix this, Pollux jumps up, walks away, and yells that he will kill them. Lucy says that she wants David to leave because of this spread. David moves to a hotel because he knows he has made things worse for his daughter. He decides to work at the animal shelter with Bev Shaw and wait for Lucy to give birth. Because he spends so much time with the Animal Welfare League, he gets attached to a certain dog and decides not to put him down every week. Soon, though, he realizes that he is only putting off the inevitable, so he brings the animal to Bev and says, "I am giving him up."
About the author. Coetzee spent most of his childhood in Cape Town and Worcester, where he moved with his family when he was 8 years old. He went to school at the University of Cape Town and got bachelor's degrees in both English and maths there. In 1962, Coetzee moved to London, where he worked as a computer programmer for IBM and got his master's degree for a paper on the author Ford Madox Ford from the University of Cape Town. Then, in 1965, Coetzee went to the University of Texas at Austin on a Fulbright grant. In 1969, he got his PhD for a thesis on Samuel Beckett that used computerized style analysis. Coetzee wanted to live in the United States for good, but he couldn't because he took part in protests against the Vietnam War. In the early 1970s, he went back to South Africa, where he taught English literature at the University of Cape Town. He got promoted several times until he retired in 2002 and moved to Australia. Coetzee has won many awards for his books, including 2 Booker Prizes for Life and Times of Michael K. and Disgrace, and the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2003. Coetzee spoke out against the apartheid system in South Africa.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.